Welcome to Blackxecutive Podcast, where we share inspiration and actionable advice for Black creatives going pro. I'm your host, Jas. With each episode, we'll chat with Black creatives thriving, all while building a network where the dreamers become doers and the aspiring become inspired. What's up, Blackxecutive fam? Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I'm your host. Well, not quite today. I'm Jas. This is our 10th episode, and we're going to try something new today. One thing I've realized is that I've shared actionable advice and inspirational stories from Black creatives from all types of backgrounds, and we've heard some phenomenal stories, but I've never shared my own. So I don't want to bore y'all rambling on about my job for an hour, and I definitely want to have someone ask me challenging questions about my career and probe me to dig deeper about the impact of my work the same way that I do with my guests. So today we're going to flip the script. I've invited my creative collab compadre and a guest from earlier this season, Tae Ebison, to interview me. So I know that Tae is a captivating storyteller. He's inquisitive by nature, so I know he's going to push me out of my comfort zone and ask me the tough questions. So welcome back, Tae, and I'm handing over today's episode to you.
Hey, first off, thanks for having me back again.
Of course.
Glad to be back and flip the roles this time.
Nice.
But yeah, so let's go ahead and jump right in without further ado. So how have you been maintaining through this whole pandemic?
It has been a trial in adaptation. So, and again, first I was cool because I was like, I'm introverted. I want to be at the house. And then after a while, I was like, I miss my coworkers. I miss seeing y'all's faces, and I talked to you about that. Then it got to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go back to work. And so now I'm at the point where I dream about being in office, like in my sleep. But I mean, I've found strategies that work for me, getting back into my regular routine instead of, sleeping until 8:30 and then hopping on Zoom for my meetings for the day. I've been getting up at 6:37, working out, meditating, reading, writing, and that gets me on track and keeps me focused. So that's the best way to cope for me. I'm just adapting.
Just adapting. Yeah, that's key. And you mentioned the fact that you gotta you found a new routine with everything that's been going on. So yeah, I definitely agree with that 100%. So yeah, looking at your title, you're a user experience content strategist and content designer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just break down what that is for people that don't know?
Okay, so that is in the realm of software and tech. So basically with user experience, the way I like to explain it to people is like, when you're on a site and you're trying to navigate something, you're trying to figure something out, the words on that site are helping you navigate it. The images that you see on the site are helping you navigate it, especially when you think about smartphone interfaces. I don't want to say Apple Watch because it's heavily branded, but smart watches. And you think about those interfaces and how we have to learn how to navigate through those. There are humans that are behind that are constantly thinking about the best way to communicate with you, thinking about the context. So, what you're doing, why you're doing it, what your intentions are when you're doing it to create the best user experience for you. So that's the part of tech that is often overlooked. People think tech may always go to developers and coders, but developers and coders do just that. They develop. Someone has to design the actual interface that people interact with. So that's where my job comes in. I spend a lot of time studying words, the way people respond to words, testing things like if I say sweepstakes instead of contest, which one are you more likely to click? And why are you clicking that? And how can I make you click it more? So that's the easiest way to explain my job. This is a lot of strategizing, heavy design, collaboration, work with a lot of designers, hence you. So I work very closely with designers. And I think that's the difference between my content role and other content roles that you commonly hear about in tech when they're like just writing the content. They're more like journalists, whereas we are literally designers. We're content designers. Content strategy was birthed from design. So actually designers had to write content and they got tired of it and said, you know what, why don't we get writers to do this? And voila, my profession came about. So I spent a lot of time doing wireframes, a lot of research, content frames, the same things that UX designers do. We do that when afforded the opportunity to. So
that was very well put. That makes a lot of sense. And I hope that the audience can also grasp what you just said, because that was very clear. How did you get into that? How did you find out about it? What sparked your interest in learning to write specifically for tech like that?
I would say I always knew I was going to be a writer. So I used to try to sell little spiral notebook books when I was 7. So my dad used to read and write a lot. I would see him have these big textbooks of all these different ideas, heavy Malcolm X. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But he would read and write a lot. My mom would read and write a lot. So I knew I wanted to write. So when I went to college, that's all I knew. I was I want to write, but I didn't want to be a starving artist. And I knew that I liked computers. My dad used to always say, you know how old folks just be oh, my baby good with computers. So my dad
every parent's bragging right.
My baby X, mm-hmm. My baby know how to set up a cell phone. My baby give me on the Facebook, So my dad was kind of always my baby's good with computers. So when I went to school for writing, I initially looked into journalism programs, and I realized that that's not the kind of work I wanted to do. I'm just now getting at a point in my life where I feel comfortable randomly talking to strangers, just now. So I didn't want to really be a journalist. And I started looking into other writing programs, and it just so happened that one of the only 2 tech writing programs in the country was in a college that was 5 minutes from me. So I enrolled in that program. Still didn't know what I wanted to do. But as I got close to my undergrad degree, I started to realize I was really interested in the tech part of it. And then when I decided to go to grad school, I decided to concentrate on software documentation specifically. So I took classes. I think the class was called New Media Literacy. And the whole class was pretty much studying the way people interact on social media, the identities that they formed. We learned a lot about phatic communication and being able to place your identity in different contexts and navigate. So I thought that was really interesting to look at it from the social media perspective. We studied memes a lot. So I learned about the first meme, which was all our base, our belong to us, which still is very just look it up. It's weird, but it was the first meme. So I actually had a class studying all of this, and it was super cool. I had another class that allowed us to build a help system for on a Adobe RoboHelp, yeah. So we built it on that, and I was this is super cool. So literally, it was time to do my thesis, and all of my other classmates were doing biographies, and they were just studying, Valley speak and up talk and things like that, which is when girls talk like this, they're always trying to ask a question at the end. I had people who were writing their theses on that, and I was just I don't want to do none of that shit. I didn't want to, I thought it was interesting, but not enough to spend a year of my time heavily researching this. And so I realized what I wanted to do was create a tool to help other students understand complex theory and complex concepts, because you learn so much theory in grad school. So I built, I say air quotes built, because it was on WordPress.org with HTML and CSS. But I built a knowledge management database for students to use and instructors to use to based off of a wiki format where they could collaboratively work on accumulating knowledge. And so I spent a lot of time researching Wikipedia, learned that it actually is more credible than the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I stand by that to this day. Fight me, don't add me. So I learned all of that, and it actually ended up being a really effective tool. The school picked it up, and teachers actually started using it in their classes for 2 years after I left. So it was this legacy that I left. But that really made me wanted to go into, I know it's a long roundabout story, but that's what made me wanted to go into the software world even more. So straight out of college, I went into software training / documentation, did way more training than I wanted to do. But I had one project where I actually had to help design the mobile app of our in-house construction management software for the firm. So I had to do some UX design, reskin some icons. I didn't have any formal training. So I was like, if I look back on it, like, that's what I was doing, you know, but it was like getting my foot in the door. And I was like, you know, this is really cool. I really want to do this. And then I didn't do it ever again at that job. And so I spent like the rest of my jobs after that, like trying to chase that and do that as like tangential work to what I was doing. And eventually I said, forget it. Like, I don't want to be on the back end of user experience anymore. I want to be on the front end. I got tired of having to solve problems after the fact. I wanted to solve problems. I wanted to prevent problems from happening in the first place. So I officially made the transition over. So that is how I got into like the tech writing, software, documentation, UX field.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing. All the way from you going to college and studying English, and then leaving your footprint, and then going off to eventually find what you wanted to do in the long run. What was your thought process behind going to school to begin with? Is that a common path for most writers?
I would say for me, at that time, I grew up in a household where it was not, if you were going to college, it was what college are you going to? So it was never an option for me to not consider college. I am a first generation college student in my family. In my entire family, I am one of the only ones with a master's degree, and eventually I'll be the second one with a PhD. So
wow,
that was kind of
congrats.
Thank you. PhD coming though, loading. But it was just, it wasn't really an option to not go. So like when I graduated high school, I ended up being a teen mom. Not going to go into that. There's so many teen moms out there. Y'all know the story. But I ended up being a teen mom. And so I took a year off to like work. And I was just like, just working. And I got to the point where I was working. I remember my shift was like 11 to 3 and my second shift was 3 to 11. And my first job was letting me get off early to go to work in my second job. And I was doing that for months, and I barely got to see my baby. She's with her dad a lot, and he was just soaking it up. He was just like, leave her with me, go to college, do your thing. Like, you know, I'm a raiser. And I was like, not my child. Like, I need to be around my child. And so because of that, I ended up like saying, forget this. Like, I can't do this. I need to go to college. So there was maybe like 9 months between when I graduated high school and when I decided to go ahead and go to school. And I started. That being said, looking at the world of UX writing today and content strategy, I do not think you need to go to college to do it. And that's from someone who I definitely value college education, clearly, as I intend to get my PhD, but I don't think that it's always necessary. I think sometimes it's just society telling us that we need to do it, and that's the path, but it's not necessarily the most efficient path. There are courses you can take to transition. There are other fields you can get experience, and you'll notice that a lot of content strategists and UX writers come from a lot of backgrounds. You will see people with biology degrees or no degrees who are just like, I've been working in this industry for so long and I had to do this work and I was able to land this job. So don't think you have to go to college to do it.
Yeah, I think that's very good to know for a lot of people that are interested in taking a path similar to yours. You mentioned that after school, you started at a job and you were sort of doing what you wanted to do. Were you a little self-conscious when you first started writing?
I don't know if I was self-conscious, because by the time I got my first job out of college, I had my master's degrees and I had been teaching. I started teaching to actually get my master's degree. So it was paid for as long as I taught classes. So at this point, I had been teaching students, college freshmen and sophomores. And I think that was probably the time where I felt most nervous, because here I am at this time. When I started teaching, I was like 22. And I'm looking at students
That's
who
young.
are also 22. Yes. My students were 22. I had one student who was like 70. I was like, dude, this is like my grandma. Like, I'm gonna fail my grandma, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I think that's where I was kind of nervous, because I had to position myself as an expert, and I had to position myself as an expert on writing. And writing is so subjective on certain things. I feel like it was hard to say like, this is right and this is wrong. And I still don't really subscribe to that notion. I think writing is very descriptive and should not be prescriptive. So I think that kind of thrust me into it early on. So by the time I actually had my first job, I was kind of just like, it is what it is. And very quickly I realized that that expertise I had established as an instructor carried over very easily to my role in software.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned writing being subjective. Could you go into what are some of like the biggest misconceptions about writing?
I would definitely say that people think that it has to be prescriptive. That's number one pet peeve of mine. When I see these memes online and they're like, there and there really mess y'all up, or we are weird, y'all stupid. And I'm like, that elitist attitude is just that. It's an elitist attitude. That's not what language is about. When you study language, you realize language is always evolving and morphing. I'm a really big fan of this podcast, Lexicon Valley, and the guy, John McWhorter. I hope I'm not butchering his last name, but he's a very prominent linguist. And he talks a lot about how language evolves just simply from our mouths and the way that we choose to enunciate, or the lack thereof, a particular word, and how it can completely change the word over time. And we're actually in the middle of a shift that's happening now. Shout out to the great vowel shift. Writers know what I'm talking about. But like, that happens over time. And because of that, language is always morphing and evolving. So one thing I just learned last week is that cyber is now considered a prefix. So if you're saying cyber degrees as a website, it's not 2 words, it's 1, which was interesting to me. So, but it's cool because you're always learning something new about language. So I would say that's probably the main thing, is that people try to use language and the use of it to create classes and categories. And we see that happen all the time with African American vernacular / Black English. We see this happening with multilingual speakers who are just using their native language, and they have broken English. ESL students, English second language students, they have certain patterns that they do because English actually doesn't make any sense. And Americans don't like to think about that, but it really doesn't make sense. Like, other languages make more sense. So like non-native speakers really struggle with a lot of the things that come naturally to us. And so I would say that's probably those 2 things are the primary things for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like people are nervous around you as a writer because they feel like you'll correct them?
Yes, and I hate it. And I know I've talked to you about this, a pet peeve of mine, because I'm just like, people will like fumble over their words trying to sound proper and correct. And I'm like, dude, just say what you're gonna say. Like, I say stuff, I'm like, I be going, because I'm Black and I speak Black English and it's valid. So, you know, I'm not going to police myself when I talk, and I don't expect people to police themselves. But I know sometimes people get I've had supervisors who will be like really self-conscious about it and will ask me in meetings, like, is that the way you should say that? Did I say the right word? And I'm like, dude, I don't know. Google, I don't know. Say what you feel, dog. Like, I gotta Google this up just like you. Like, I just speak as long as I get the meaning, and that's the thing that matters. If the meaning is not impacted, then like, leave it alone. There was actually a good discussion I was in the other day with in a group of UX writers. We were talking about, do you correct your coworkers when they say something incorrect, or when they use a term incorrectly? Like, a big pet peeve is tone of voice, when it's really tone and voice. That you should be saying. Yeah, they're 2 separate things. Your voice is like how you hear me talking to you now, and the tone is when I'm talking like, oh, it's good, when I'm like, nigga, what's good? Like, I can say the same thing, you know, and come off different because of my tone. And so a lot of times people don't really get that. They don't get that. And so it's a big pet peeve, but I feel like that's not their job to understand the difference between tone and voice. Is mine. So I'm not going to put that on my coworkers. I'm not going to correct you. So I know what you mean. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that I feel like that's huge with like any profession, especially as a writer. You mentioned that you were teaching back in college to sort of fund your degree.
Mm-hmm.
What other, I feel like knowing you've also mentioned that like you've done other things outside of like work and teaching. Like you mentioned that you've wrote books and things like that. So what
Mm-hmm.
other endeavors have you done as a writer?
Let's see. I've done a lot of freelance work. So realized that the type of freelance work I was doing really quickly is not what I wanted to do. I would edit work for people, edit books. I did a lot of resume writing. I've still done a few of those. I've done manuals, indexes, just like really not fun writing work. But it's like if you have to get the bills paid, you know, I had time where I was doing contract work, and in between contracts, you know, if our contract ends early, you have to do what you do. So I would freelance. I would say the more fun work that I've done a few years ago, well, maybe like a little bit over a year ago, I got into Amazon KDP publishing. So, and I will do an episode on that because I think that's a great hustle for people to pick up. But basically, you could just like design a book, upload it, and Amazon will print on demand it for you to your customers. So I created some low content books specifically for little Black and brown girls because I feel like there's not enough content out there for them. I was little Black and brown girl. I have little Black and brown girls. So I want them to feel represented. And I kind of got tired of seeing books and things that with girls that didn't look like them. It was just old. I didn't want them coloring pictures of girls that didn't look like them. And I get a lot of crap from my family, but I'm very particular about having images of all Black people in my house. We do have some diverse images and things like that that have multiple people, but you will never see like one sole image of like a white person in my house because I feel like my kids are bombarded with those images constantly. And at home, they need to be surrounded with people who look like them, like to affirm them, to affirm you are beautiful. How you look is normal. Your hair is supposed to be this way. You know, it's okay. Like you are not going against the grain by being who you are. You just are. So I never want them to feel like they're not represented in their own home. And so I felt like if I was going to make books and things like that, I needed to do something for my children. So that's been one of the primary things I've been working on. And I'm working on a full content book with lots of pretty pictures of little Black and brown girls doing things that we do, like, you know, just anything. So, you know, you hear those things like I was listening to a podcast and somebody was like, you know, I can't relate to Becky doing yoga and going hiking. I'm Black. We don't do that. We're not a monolith. I like hiking and yoga, and I'm also Black, and I like chai, and that's cool. So, you know, I want to make sure that my daughters also feel that too.
Yeah, speaking of your daughters, how do you manage a work-life balance with everything that you do?
It is a matter of getting up early and going to bed late. So I have to make time for me to be a good Jasmine, as I like to put it. Like when I don't make time for me, I don't like that version of myself. Because I'm easily agitated. I'm not as patient with my kids or, you know, my partner. So I always want to make sure that I get up in the morning and make an hour and a half of time for me. And then I help my kids get situated. I take breaks throughout my workday since we're at home right now to make sure that I can help them get situated, especially with classes and things where I see patterns. You know, you just like any other parent, you observe your kids, you see patterns. I noticed like, oh, my second grader really struggles with getting on this particular class, or at 2:00 every day, I find her like playing with her dolls instead of looking at Zoom, you know, because she's tired. So, you know, I know at 2:00 I need to go check on my baby to make sure that she's engaged in class. So, which sucks, but it's just the world we're living in right now. So it's just a matter of that. In the evenings, I have to make sure I have time for my partner, especially now that I'm, you know, podcasting and doing a lot of stuff in the evening. So I try to organize my schedule around when he's gaming. Try to make sure that we have like a date night during the week so that he doesn't feel neglected. But I feel like that's a struggle of all of us, like, I'm sure you can relate.
Oh yeah.
And your partner is like, I need this time, and you're just like, I really need to get this done right now. I'm sorry. But that's pretty much been the balance, just trying to give everyone designated time throughout the day.
Yeah. Like you said, I can attest to everything you just said. Being a busy creative myself. But you mentioned that you meditate earlier. How do you feel like that affects or plays a role into your creative process?
I am a very visual meditator. So I will, I know like there are different ways you can approach it. There are some days where I just feel like I need to escape, especially if there's a situation or a person that I'm dealing with that's causing me a lot of, I just say emotional weight. Then I have to go to places where I can visually place that person away from me. And that translates over into work as well. Sometimes, you know, things aren't working out at work, or my brain is stuck on something. I can't think through a solution. So I have to meditate and go to a different place to put that somewhere else. Sometimes I go the complete opposite way, and I ground down completely and just focus on like being where I am, listening to the sounds, being immersed in my environment. And I feel like that helps with my creativity as well, because I just kind of go deeper into myself. And I feel like when I do that, I'm able to more easily flow through words when I'm thinking through these. And I think I'm a better collaborator also when I've had time to like place that creative energy elsewhere, which I think starting off early in my morning doing that gives me time to kind of play in that creative space with my mind. I've always had a very active imagination, to the point that I will imagine entire lifetimes that never happened.
Yeah, that's dope. What type are you using, like guided meditations, or are you just sitting with your own thoughts and doing it on your own?
I usually do it on my own. I started off using guided meditation, and I still do go back to it when I cannot clear my brain. I am a huge overthinker, and it will just like carry over into me sleeping at night. I would just literally think myself to sleep. I will exhaust my brain. So guided helps when I'm having one of those days and I'm just like, I can't focus on anything. But some days I just need music. I turn on some Janae, or I'll just listen to, I'm really big on, it's kind of weird, I love a good movie score. So Hans Zimmer is one for me. And he did like the score for Inception, also Interstellar. And I listen to a lot of that. So like you come in my meditation space and you hear like this movie music, you're like, what is going on? And I'm sitting here like Doctor Strange, you know?
It's so funny. My brother put me onto like movie scores, and he was listening to it one time, and we had a basketball game we were getting ready for, and he was in the room, and I went in there to go ask him a question, and he was in there playing his movie music, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's sitting there trying to focus, get ready for the game. I'm like, what are you bumping to right now? This is what you're using to get motivated? But
yeah.
But yeah, after he put me on to like, he caught like, there's this, I guess this genre called like epic music. So it's like up tempo and
yes,
like very energizing to like get you in the mood to do stuff. Once he put me onto it, I was like, yo, this actually works.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I also love lo-fi. I listen to lo-fi a lot of times when I'm working during the day.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that sometimes like it's hard for you to focus and that you're having one of those days. So how do you deal with writer's block and how do you stay motivated?
I would think, I'll say this. I think writer's block almost shows like your maturity as a writer. And I say this because there's this show, I don't know, is it the 20s? 20s is the show. It's a real cool show. If you like Insecure, to listeners, you'll like 20s. So 20s has a scene, and there's this young writer trying to get into Hollywood, and she has this mentor. It's a very beautiful, very attractive Black woman. And she was talking about having writer's block or whatever. And she was like,
I don't have time to have writer's block. I got shit to do. Like,
Hmm.
and that's the way that I kind of deal with it, because beforehand, when I was kind of like a student in college or whatnot, and writing was just so cathartic, and it was like, this is my craft, and I'm all like spacey hippie, and it's like, I love words, you know, and it was kind of like that. Then I had time and space to have writer's block and kind of be stuck on an idea and ponder it and discuss it with my classmates and go through philosophy and theory. What would Nietzsche say? Like, I don't have time for that now. I don't have time for that. So it's like, if I have to write, then I have to write. And one of my really good friends just published a full-length fiction book. Shout out to Rachel Hayes. Check out her book. One of her characters is based on me. I just love her.
Oh.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. But basically, she told me that, like, one of her strategies, she was just like, I just have to block off 2 hours a day. It doesn't matter when or how, I have to block 2 hours off, and I'm going to write. I can write on paper, I can write on a computer, but I need to write during that time. So for when it's something I have to get done, it's literally setting a deadline and saying, you need to get this done, find time to do it. And that forces me to think through it, because what you'll notice with writer's block, once you sit down, the most intimidating thing is getting to the computer or your pen or whatever, your paper, and looking at it blank. That's the most difficult thing. Once you start writing, even though it feels bad at the time, like, oh, this is crap, eventually you'll get into a flow and you'll find what you're looking for. The words will work. You'll go in and edit. You'll cut things out. You'll see patterns. You'll see other concepts that stick out, you know, the different direction you want to go with your work, and it'll just flow. But if you never sit down and make the time to do it, it's not going to happen. The biggest hurdle to writer's block is sitting down and actually writing. You just have to write. Even if you think it's bad, just do it.
Yeah, that's huge. You mentioned that sometimes, like, you write it down on paper, sometimes like you at the computer. What tools do you use primarily for writing, and why?
I know the writing community is going to yell at me, but I use Google Docs. And I know Microsoft Word is almost like a cardinal sin right now, because it's just, so many writers have gotten away from it because of the spell check. And the last thing you want to do when you're trying to ideate is have someone telling you misspelled it. I know I misspelled it, dude. Like, I'm not worried about that. I'm just trying to get this idea out. So there's another one. I want to say it's Scrivener. Yeah, Hemingway is a correction tool. Scrivener. And that's one that I've recently been put on. And so I'm going to start doing some writing there. But Google Docs is like my go-to, because a lot of times I write faster by typing than I can physically with my hands. Plus, my handwriting is just chicken scratch. Like, it's a joke in my family, I'm the writer who can't write, because my handwriting is so bad. Like, it's so bad. So I can't even read my own writing sometimes when I write. So it's easier for me to, like, throw it in a Google Doc, and then I have the app on my phone. So if I wake up in the middle of the night, I have a thought, or early in the morning, I have a thought, I'll just open up the app, put it in my phone, and then later I can return to the document as a whole on my computer screen and start to organize it and see patterns from there.
Yeah, chicken scratch, that's me all day long. I think I've become the definition of chicken scratch. Trying to read what I write is like trying to decode a foreign language written for someone as a spy or something. But
you've been working on that though, right? You've been trying different strategies.
I've been working on it. I've been trying different things to try to, like, write faster and to like get my thoughts out clearly. But you mentioned that as you're writing, that you don't like for people to, like, sort of check you when you're in that ideation phase, because you're just trying to get your ideas out. Do you feel like that is a good practice for aspiring writers to just, like, sit down and write without editing and then go back and apply, like, the edits?
Absolutely. If you try to edit as you go, you will break your flow. That's when you become self-conscious as a writer. You're like, and then a lot of times, because I said, it's like this, when you writing is the rules of grammar are so unnatural, right? The way we speak, we do not speak how we write, and vice versa. We speak in sentence fragments. utterances, a lot of throughout the conversation, because we're thinking and we're processing. It's like we're live, just like if this interview is live, you're going to see me fumble, versus if it's edited, it's going to be nice and cleaned up. So writing is like that. If you focus on trying to get your thoughts on paper, then you'll get it down and you can move on and go back and check it later. If you try to edit, you get out of that natural flow of what you really want to say, and you step out of your natural voice. So just literally, as it's in your head, write it. I misspell words. I use things I know that this is not correct at all. I use the wrong word choice. And that's another thing I had to not get caught up in. I'm really big on I want to make sure I use the exact word. Doesn't matter how many times I've read the definition, I'm going to always Google a word, period. Mm-hmm. If I question it, it could be dog. If I'm using it in this particular context and I don't know if that's correct, I'm still going to Google it. So, I'll get caught up in that and it will mess up my flow. So now I don't even do that. It's just just write. I can make a note to come back. I know I can go back and edit and catch it later. But yeah, just definitely write. Don't waste your time trying to edit, and use services that don't try to edit you. Google Docs still does try to edit you. Grammarly, if you use that extension, which I do a lot because it's super helpful, but it will try to edit the crap out of you. And it's I just need to ideate right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense and will resonate with a lot of people. You mm-hmm. mentioned that you go to Google and look things up, and that you just want to sit down and write. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know where you go for inspiration and how do you save that inspiration?
Let's see. I love Medium. Medium is my go-to. I've published a few articles on Medium, but Medium is my go-to because you have a range of writers. On Medium, you find scholarly writers who are very academic, research-based, and writers who are writing for different brands and representing a company. And then you have people who just woke up one day and was like, I'm just going to write on Medium. And you can tell, but they all approach content differently in the way that they speak. I really admire a lot of Medium has, one of the publications is Zora on Medium, and they are a Black focused publication, and they have a lot of content that uses AAVE, and they're very colloquial in a lot of their language in a way that's effective. So I will check a lot of Medium articles. I also have certain people that I follow on social media who are very deep thinkers, and they challenge a lot of social norms, and they're provocative, and they say things that piss people off, like the whole unpopular opinion X. I love those people because I have a lot of unpopular opinions. So I've learned I keep most of them to myself so people don't hate my guts. But but I will follow those people, and I'll check their work, and that's really where I find a lot of inspiration. When it comes to just writing for work, I have sites that I'll go to, emails, reallygoodemails.com is one that I go to for work because they have really good emails and you can search them. So I use them for ideas a lot. And I'm heavily immersed in research. So sometimes I would literally just go to Nielsen Norman and look at what the new research is that's come out, or the Baymar Institute, and, take that and apply that to my writing. And, that research will inform some of my decisions.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned unpopular opinions. Mm-hmm. Do you have any hot takes or unpopular opinions on writing?
There's so many. I'm trying to think. I will say the first one, the most unpopular one, I feel like I get the most pushback on is I really feel like you should feel empowered to write to users in the language that they speak. And when I say that, other writers always go, yeah, we should do that. And then as soon as I write a sentence and it's grammatically incorrect to their eye, or it's using language that they don't think is professional, then it's like, do we think that's going to resonate with our audience? And it's like, do you know who your audience is? Because that's who I wrote it for, you know, and I know the language that they're speaking because I did the research. I went to the forums. I saw their product reviews on your service, and I know what language they're using. So that is, to me, is super important to do that, because when you don't speak to users in language that they understand, you don't reach them. And if you try to train them into a language that you want to speak, you stop them from being vulnerable and sharing their experiences or engaging with your product. So I'll probably say that's the most unpopular one. I'm a big advocate for just using the language that works for you as well. So the anti-code switch movement, working on being unapologetically, that's that word today. We got it today, Jas. But myself in corporate spaces, and just getting out of that habit of thinking that, you know, you have to code switch when you don't, and we're not going to do it anymore.
I'll retweet that all day long. You mentioned, so I can definitely agree with that first unpopular opinion you mentioned about like writing content based on like what the audience will understand. I remember working on a freelance project once, and it was for an audience that was primarily a Spanish speaking audience. And I remember when we first started the project, the direction from the stakeholder I was working with was saying, yeah, we're going to write it in English and just go to Google Translate and figure out what it says in Spanish. And I was like, that's like super formal, and it's doesn't translate exactly one-to-one from English to Spanish. So what we ended up doing was like hiring like a Spanish speaking writer who was able to like translate things in like an informal way that speaks to the audience in a way that they can understand. So definitely agree with what you said 100%. But yeah, it sounds like you're very passionate about writing. You've already dropped a lot of gems. You mentioned some podcasts. You've also mentioned that like books and stuff. So can you drop a few books that you've read recently, and then talk through some books that you're reading now?
Recently, okay, let me think. 2 books that I recently read that really resonated with me and particularly challenged me. Think, which I cannot. Thick, that's the name of the book. Boom. Thick is the name of the book. Thick? And I cannot, thick, Thick, like thick. Baby, I'm thick in the Black community. She thick. Anyway, so, but that's how the author played on that language. And even the visual, I believe the H in thick is like spread out wide. I love it. But it's written by a Black woman who is like balancing being an academic and trying to write for her community and the challenges that she's faced. So of course I can totally relate to that. That's like my life. So it doesn't matter how corporate I go. I'm always an academic at heart because I'm big on research. That's one of the books that I read where I really felt seen. Like a lot of times you read books and we consume media, especially as Black people and Black women, that doesn't, it's like, it's kind of related to our experience, but it's not directly related to us. So that book to me was like, that book was written for me, by me, for someone who is going through the exact same thing that I'm going through. Another one is Eloquent Rage. I want to say the author is Brittany Cooper. So I recently read that. And when I first read it, like I went through this roller coaster. The first half of it, I was like, okay, I'm with you, girl. Like, cause she's talking about basically channeling what is considered rage. She talks a lot about the angry Black woman stereotype and that how that trope is perpetuated. And she talks a lot about just channeling it and using it to do good work and move the community. But in the middle of the book, she kind of started getting into a little bit of respectability politics. She started getting into politics, period, which I just didn't think was a good place. I was like, nah, sis, I don't fool with that, sis. I ain't with you on that. But I stuck with it. I try not to stop reading books just because I disagree, so because I think it's important to be challenged. So I stuck with it. And in the end of the book, she got me back. So that's one I'm going to go back and reread. I'm currently reading I have about two more chapters in All About Love by Bell Hooks. It's an interesting book. That's another one that has challenged me. Crazy that I consider myself a womanist, but I have not read much Bell Hooks. So this is my first full read of her book, one of her books. And it talks about love, not just from a romantic stance, but she talks about the lack of love in American culture and how it plays into parenting, interactions with each other, just in some of the issues that plague our society, she feels like are based on a lack of love. So she really explores love in a lot of ways. And she talks about being a woman, and particularly a Black woman, having to speak about love when men who are so much considered not emotional are usually the writers on these texts about love. And so and she's like challenging that. So I have a few more chapters of that. And I just started Pleasure Activism. Just started it. I'm excited about it. It's a very interesting book. In the foreword, she already talks about how literally saying, I want you to orgasm in between each chapter. So this is going to be an interesting journey. But the book is about basically seeking pleasure in everything. So of course she does talk about sexual pleasure, being on the queer spectrum, all types of relationships. She talks about being a Black woman. She's actually biracial. She talks about her identity in that at this point in history, in time, which I very much understood and respected that. And this idea that in 100 years, people can talk about identifying as Black the same way we talk about identifying as Negro now. None of us would ever identify as Negro. So really interesting concepts there. And I'm really interested in how she's going to explore this idea of finding pleasure in everything that you do and actively making pleasure in your life and being okay and loud with accepting pleasure, which she feels like America's capitalist culture tries to make so negative. Talking about pleasure is taboo. Being happy can be considered taboo for certain things. Finding pleasure in being a Black woman in a time in which we're so oppressed could be considered taboo. But it shouldn't be. So we'll see how it goes. But within the first few chapters so far, she has my attention.
Yeah, that's dope. You I like the books that you've been reading. What format do you read in? So I know I see the physical books behind you. I see the stack back there. Are you a physical book reader, primarily an audio book reader, or are you an ebook reader off of like a Kindle or an iPad or something?
All of the above. These are for decor. But I'm so much on the go. I do a lot of Audible books because I have to move around the house. Even though we're home, I'm still moving. So I'll do that. What I'll do a lot of times is listen while I'm driving or doing something around the house. Then I'll get either the physical book or the ebook and go back and read over ideas, highlight concepts that stood out to me, make notes and things like that. So I do everything. What I feel like, I know that's another area where I feel like sometimes people can be elitist, like, oh, you didn't actually read the book, you're blah, blah, blah. Really, I mean, yes, there are benefits that come from actually reading, physically reading and seeing the words and hearing in your voice how you perceive that content, but also the knowledge is there regardless of how I consume it, right? So I'm really reading for the knowledge on these things and these perspectives. And a lot of the audiobooks, I like to hear if the author is the reader. I definitely want to hear how they are interpreting their work. And that's something you don't get when you're reading it yourself. You're interpreting it yourself. But when they actually are reading it to you, how they intended things with their inflection and their tone.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm one of those as well where I read in just about every format there is. Physical books, as you can see with the books behind me, physical books, ebooks on like a Kindle, and then also doing audiobooks if I'm like busy and just want to try to multitask. But you mentioned earlier that you're reading a book that made you feel seen as a Black woman. How do you think your representation and your work in content excuse me, it impacts the Black community?
I think the easy play is the low content books, right? Because they're literally excuse me, they're literally books for Black and brown children. So like, that's the easy play. Like, of course, I'm making something for them. My dad, who is in a small town in Mississippi, recently showed one of the books to one of his neighbors who's older, and she got emotional. And this woman is in like her 50s, because she said, we didn't have these types of things when I was a kid. And when I created it, I never would have thought that a 50-year-old woman would be impacted by something I made for my 7-year-old daughter, so I think that that's an easy play to go with. I feel like that it's like a very evident impact. With my work at work in my full-time role, I feel like it's a matter of being that representation, right? I have to be the one in the conversation who says, is this the best language to use when we're looking at our demographic? And having that language to authentically say these things. One thing I was questioned on recently in a workshop at work was like, how do we speak to users in these languages, without being inauthentic? And I said, you don't. You hire people who authentically and natively speak those languages. Mm-hmm. We need more diversity. We need more diverse writers. I don't need you to appropriate my culture to write for me. I need you to hire someone who looks like me to write for me. So that kind of, I feel like that's needed, and someone has to be that voice to have those conversations. And so many times in my career, especially when you're early in your career, you're not in those rooms. You can't have those conversations. You're not in those senior leadership positions. So now that I'm in a position where, I still have allies, of course, and I think allies are super important. We still live in a society where they're still the majority, and we still have to have people who have our best interests, and they can, voice that in rooms when we're not there. So of course that's so important. But now when I am in these rooms, I'm always looking for ways to bring my people in. I'm in the conversation saying, why don't we have more Black writers, or just writers of color, period? It doesn't always have to be a Black person. We don't have any Hispanics. We don't have any Indians. But I feel like just being that representation and being that voice and being the ear, being the listener, anytime I'm in a position to be in a room and I know that they're talking about other Black creatives in the space, and I'm like, I'm going to ping that Black creative. I'm not going to tell them what was said, but if I heard them talking about your time management skills, I'm going to ping you and be like, hey, so like, how long is it taking you on that project? Oh, you need me to help you with something? I'm going to do things like that to nudge you, because I know in these other rooms you're being spoken about, and I want to do what I can to make sure that you're succeeding. And I feel like that's one of the biggest impacts. So just that representation, not only on these websites and being able to challenge people on their language choices, and even when I'm collabing with designers and challenging them on their image choices with not having enough diversity in images and illustrations, but just being representing when I can.
Very well said. Very well said. I feel like you've been given a lot of free game, a lot of free jewelry today. What other advice would you have for aspiring Black professionals who are looking to become content strategists?
I would probably say there are two ways, like there's general and specific. For like specifically to get into content strategy, get into your research, dive into your research, get on Nielsen Norman, get on interaction design, find all the resources that designers are using and study those resources, because you are not just a writer, you are a designer. In the role that I'm in now, the person who hired me when I came in the door even said one of the reasons I was hired was because I had design background. Like, and as I said on your episode, I'm not like you code. I'm not code, but I'm better than average, compared to the other people out here. So having those adaptable skills, being able to show that like I do have a background in UX, I do understand the importance of advocating for the users and users' needs, and being genuine about that. Like, I feel like if you really don't care to be a champion for people and their needs, you're not going to find joy in the work. So you need to dive into yourself and figure out if that's work that you want to do that you find important. On a general side, I would say definitely to take advantage of connections. I'm always trying to connect with people. And so in the workplace, when you find people that you work really well with them, link with them. You don't have to love their personality, but you work well with them. So connect with them. If you find people, I really love their personality, but we don't really work well together. I have people like that too, where I'm like, that's my girl, but I can't work with her. You know, connect with those people too. And when you find someone who's both, like I work well with them and I connect with their personality, latch onto the person because it's so hard to find those good connections, and you never know where people are going to go once they leave that company. You're not going to work at that company forever. You don't know what they're going to do, and you need to form those relationships. And I think you have to be very strategic about it and be genuine. I think if you're trying to just like form relationships to get something from someone, it's not going to get you very far. You know, you have to literally really be genuine, and people will know. You know, I have tons of Black writers that I don't even work with ever, but I literally looked in the database at work, found them, and reached out and said, hey, you want to hop on a Zoom call? I never met you. And we just talk. And now you know who I am. I know who you are. We may never work together, but we have this connection. I think that's important, especially being a Black creative. We need as many allies as possible. There's strength in numbers, as we know. And a lot of times when we speak on issues, when you're the only one speaking, it feels like it's easy for you to be attacked. You're like open. But when you have other people who feel the same way and can, you know, say like, I second that idea, I'm also experiencing that, it's easier for you to make moves in the workplace. So form those connections, find your tribe, and stick with those people. So in case you haven't noticed, you're part of my tribe, Tae.
Exposed. Exposed. No, I think that was genius to research best practices and to learn design, whether it's like visual design and UX design. I think that's genius, and I feel like I would definitely say the same thing. And then also like networking and building like genuine relationships, not these fabricated relationships where you're using people as a tool. But yeah, that is very well said. So just to go ahead and wrap everything up, how can people find you and keep pace with your creative journey?
Glad you asked. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, you're experiencing it. So this is a part of my creative journey. You can find, of course, me anywhere you find Blackxecutive, because it's my baby. If you're interested in my corporate work, you can find me at jaswillwrite.com, and that will show you a portfolio of everything that I've been talking about on today's episode.
Awesome. You mentioned Medium earlier as well. What is your Medium handle if people want to go and read some of the work you're publishing?
I want to say it's Jas Will. I've changed it a few times. Don't hold me. I'm going to put it in the show notes, y'all. Don't hold me to that. But I think I want to say that it's Jas Will. But yeah, I only have a few pieces on Medium, and I will be transferring that content over to Blackxecutive, so you won't have to look for it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you did really good.
Thanks for watching Blackxecutive. Join the conversation in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe. You can find a full list of all available podcast episodes on blackxecutive.com or wherever you stream. Until next time, keep aspiring to inspire.